I'm crushed and desperate. It all started after my wife, Laura, went on a so-called business trip for a week. Turns out she actually went on holiday with her lover, David. She'd even gone so far as to Photoshop fake business trip photos to cover her tracks. I accidentally found out when I checked the photo metadata. Now, my marriage and dreams of owning a house, for which I worked 2 jobs, are in shambles. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take it one step at a time. Laura and I had been married for 7 years. We met in college, and it felt like a fairy tale. She was charming, ambitious, and we shared big dreams. We worked our asses off, saved every penny, and finally we were in a good place. I was working 2 jobs, and Laura had a stable career in marketing. Life seemed perfect until it all started falling apart last month. Laura came home one evening looking unusually excited. "Guess what?" She beamed. "I've got to go on a business trip next week. It's a great opportunity." She explained that her company was sending her to a marketing conference in Chicago. I was happy for her. We celebrated with a bottle of wine, and I encouraged her to seize the opportunity. Little did I know, this was the beginning of a nightmare. The week of the trip, things felt off. Laura was more secretive than usual. She'd been glued to her phone, always stepping out of the room to take calls. It was weird, but I brushed it off as pre-trip stress. The night before she left, I caught a glimpse of her phone. There were texts from Sam, someone I'd never heard of. But again, I trusted her. Laura left early Monday morning. She kissed me goodbye, promised to call every night, and off she went. The first couple of days she did call, but something felt forced. The conversations were brief, and she always seemed in a hurry. By Wednesday, her calls became sporadic. She'd text me saying she was exhausted from the day's events and would call in the morning, which never happened. On Thursday, my friend Mark called to ask how I was holding up. We talked about everything, work, life, and then Laura. I mentioned the business trip, and he asked, "Did you say Chicago? That's where David's headed this week too." David was Laura's coworker, and a name that had come up more than once in our conversations. My gut twisted. I started to connect the dots. The late-night texts, the secretive calls, the sudden trip. I needed to know more. Friday night, Laura texted me saying she'd be late and not to wait up. I couldn't shake the unease, so I decided to do a little digging. I sat at the computer and opened Laura's social media accounts. She had shared a few photos from the conference, generic shots of conference halls, cityscapes, and one of her standing by a hotel window. I downloaded the photos and checked the metadata. To my horror, the photos were taken a week before the trip, right here in our city. My heart pounded. I felt sick. This was all a lie. Laura had gone to great lengths to fabricate this trip, but why? I needed more proof. I logged into our shared phone plan account and checked her call history. There it was, multiple calls to David, hours-long conversations, especially in the last few weeks. My hands shook as I pieced it all together. Laura was cheating on me. Saturday morning, Laura returned, looking relaxed and tanned. "Hey, babe," she greeted me cheerfully. I could barely hold it together. "How was the trip?" I asked, my voice strained. She launched into a rehearsed story about seminars and networking. I let her talk, every word fueling my anger. When she finished, I quietly handed her the printed metadata and call logs. "Explain this," I said coldly. Her face went pale. "Where did you get this?" she stammered. "It doesn't matter. Explain it." Laura's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. "You lied to me, Laura. You went on a vacation with David, didn't you?" She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I was unhappy, and David was there for me." Her excuses fell on deaf ears. Laura admitted everything. She and David had been having an affair for months. It started with innocent lunches, then escalated to late-night calls, and finally the trip. She'd edited the photos to cover her tracks, thinking I'd never find out. "I was lonely," she said. "You were always working, and I felt neglected." Her words cut deep, but they didn't justify her betrayal. I asked her to leave. She pleaded for another chance, swearing she'd end it with David and we could fix things. But the damage was done. Laura moved out that evening. I filed for divorce the next week. The house felt empty, but I couldn't bear to live in a place filled with lies. Friends and family were shocked, offering support, but nothing could fill the void. I'm at a crossroads now. The dream of a happy marriage and a cozy home is shattered. What would you do if you were me? How do you move on from such a betrayal? I spent that first night alone in our house, barely able to sleep. My mind kept replaying every moment of the past few months, trying to see where I had missed the signs. It was like a bad movie that I couldn't switch off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Laura and David together, laughing, touching, and sharing moments that should have been ours. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed and tried to get through the day. I went to work, but I was a mess. My coworkers noticed something was off, but I just mumbled about having a rough night. I couldn't focus. My mind kept wandering back to Laura's betrayal. How could she do this to me? To us? I decided to confront David. I needed to hear his side of the story, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought it would bring some closure, or perhaps I just wanted to see him squirm. I managed to get his number from a mutual acquaintance and called him during my lunch break. David sounded surprised, but not shocked. "Hey man, I was going to call you," he started. "I think we need to talk." "No shit, David, we need to talk," I replied, my voice shaking with anger. "Meet me at the park near my office in an hour." I spent the next hour pacing, trying to control my fury. When David finally arrived, he looked uncomfortable. Good. He should be. We sat on a bench, and for a moment I just stared at him, taking in the face of the man who had ruined my life. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you do it?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It just happened. We didn't plan it. One thing led to another, and we got caught up in it." "Bullshit," I spat. "You don't just get caught up in cheating on your spouse, you make choices." He nodded, looking ashamed. "I'm sorry, man, I really am. Laura and we made a mistake, a huge mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think calling it a mistake makes it better? You betrayed me, David. Both of you did." David didn't have much else to say. He apologized a few more times, but his words felt empty. I left the park feeling more hollow than before, but at least I had faced him. It didn't bring me any peace, but it was a step towards confronting the reality of my situation. Over the next few days, I tried to keep myself busy. Work was a welcome distraction, and I threw myself into my tasks, hoping to drown out the thoughts of Laura and David. But every quiet moment was torture. Nights were the worst. The bed felt too big and too cold without Laura beside me. One evening, I was scrolling through old photos on my phone, reminiscing about happier times. That's when I noticed something odd. In one of Laura's business trip photos, I spotted a detail that didn't fit. There was a reflection in a window that looked like palm trees, definitely not something you'd see in Chicago. My curiosity piqued. I decided to do a little more investigating. I dug out Laura's laptop and started looking through her files. I found a folder labeled Work Trips and opened it. Sure enough, there were more photos, all meticulously edited. But when I checked the metadata, it was clear they had been taken weeks before her supposed trip. My heart sank as the truth became undeniable. Laura had planned this. She had carefully constructed an elaborate lie, hoping I'd never discover the truth. But why go to such lengths? I needed to know more, so I decided to check her emails. I felt a pang of guilt as I typed in her password, a combination of our initials and wedding date. The inbox was filled with work emails, but I kept digging. Then I found it, an email chain between Laura and David, filled with intimate messages and plans for their week together. My hands shook as I read through their conversations. They talked about everything, from mundane daily details to their excitement about spending a week together. They even joked about how gullible I was, believing the fake business trip story. The betrayal stung even more knowing they had laughed at my expense. I couldn't read anymore. I slammed the laptop shut and sat there, my mind reeling. Laura and David's affair was more than just a fling. It was a calculated, ongoing betrayal. I felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner. The next day, I decided to confront Laura again. She needed to know I was aware of the extent of her deceit. I texted her, asking her to come by the house that evening. She agreed, probably thinking I was ready to talk things through. When she arrived, I didn't waste any time. I showed her the photos, the emails, everything. She tried to deny it at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Finally, she broke down, sobbing. "I'm so sorry," she cried. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just so unhappy, and David made me feel alive again." "Unhappy?" I echoed, my voice rising. "And you think cheating on me was the solution? You didn't even give us a chance to fix things. You just ran off with him." Laura had no real defense. She kept apologizing, but it all sounded hollow. I told her to leave, and this time I meant it. She gathered some of her things and left, tears streaming down her face. But I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for her. Not anymore. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out and the lies were exposed. It hurt like hell, but at least I wasn't living in the dark anymore. Now it was time to figure out how to move forward. The days following our confrontation were a blur. I was a mess, barely eating or sleeping. My mind kept replaying the moments of Laura's confession, her tears, and her feeble attempts at apologies. I felt a strange mix of anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal that I couldn't shake off. My friends and family reached out, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. It felt too raw, too personal. One evening, as I was sorting through our finances for the impending divorce, I stumbled upon Laura's old phone. She had upgraded a few months back, and this one had been lying around unused. On a whim, I decided to go through it. I don't know what I was expecting to find. Maybe some closure, some explanation for why she did what she did. The phone was unlocked, and I started sifting through the messages and photos. Most of it was old stuff, nothing particularly incriminating. Then, I found a hidden folder in her photo gallery. Inside were pictures and videos of Laura and David, together in ways that made my stomach churn. There were selfies of them in bed, videos of them laughing and joking, completely oblivious to the hurt they were causing. I felt like I was going to be sick. Seeing the evidence of their affair laid out so blatantly made everything so much worse. It was like a knife twisting in my gut. But I couldn't stop looking. I needed to understand the full extent of their betrayal. The more I saw, the angrier I became. This wasn't just a moment of weakness or a one-time mistake. This was a full-blown affair with no regard for the consequences. They had mocked me, laughed at my expense, and continued their charade without a second thought. My blood boiled at the thought of how they had played me for a fool. I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I strolled through the park, memories of Laura and I together kept flashing in my mind. The picnics, the long walks, the talks about our future. It all felt like a lifetime ago. I sat down on a bench trying to make sense of it all. How had we gone from that to this? That's when I saw David, walking hand in hand with his wife, Emily. The sight of them together sent a fresh wave of anger through me. How could he continue to live his life so normally, as if nothing had happened? I wanted to march up to them and expose him right then and there, but I restrained myself. There would be a time and place for that. I followed them from a distance, watching as they interacted. Emily seemed blissfully unaware of her husband's infidelity. They laughed, chatted, and looked every bit the happy couple. It made me sick. How many lies had he told her to keep her in the dark? How many times had he betrayed her trust? I decided I needed to talk to Emily. She deserved to know the truth, just like I did. But I didn't want to do it impulsively. I needed to gather all the evidence, make sure she had everything she needed to see the full picture. I went back home, determined to compile everything I had. Over the next few days, I gathered all the photos, videos, and messages I could find. I made copies of everything and organized them in a way that would be easy for Emily to understand. It was a painstaking process, but it gave me a sense of purpose. It was something I could focus on, something that gave me a semblance of control in a situation that felt completely out of my hands. Once I had everything ready, I reached out to Emily. I found her on social media and sent her a message, explaining who I was and that I had something important to discuss with her. I was careful with my words, not wanting to alarm her too much. I just asked if we could meet in person. She responded quickly, agreeing to meet at a coffee shop near her house. When I arrived, I saw her sitting by the window looking nervous. I took a deep breath and walked in, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. There was no turning back now. I introduced myself and we made some small talk. She seemed sweet, a bit shy, but very kind. It made what I had to do even harder. Finally, I couldn't delay it any longer. I handed her the folder with all the evidence and explained everything. As she went through the contents, her face paled. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked at me with a mix of disbelief and horror. "How long?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Months," I replied. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I didn't want to hurt you, but you needed to know." She nodded, wiping away tears. "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't believe he did this." We talked for a while longer, sharing our stories and our pain. It was a difficult conversation, but it felt good to have someone who understood what I was going through. By the end of it, we both felt a strange sense of solidarity. We were in this together, whether we liked it or not. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a little lighter. The burden of carrying this secret was no longer mine alone. Emily now knew the truth, and together, we could decide what to do next. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After meeting Emily, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Knowing that I wasn't alone in this nightmare made it a bit more bearable. We decided to stay in touch, offering each other support and updates as we navigated the fallout from our spouse's betrayal. The next few days were a whirlwind. Emily confronted David, and the fallout was as explosive as expected. He denied everything at first, but the evidence was irrefutable. Emily told me about the screaming matches, the tears, and the endless apologies. David moved out, and Emily was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered life. Meanwhile, I was gearing up for my confrontation with Laura. I needed to see her one last time to get the closure I deserved. I texted her, asking if we could meet at a nearby park. She agreed, probably thinking I was ready to talk things through. Little did she know I had a different plan. When Laura arrived, she looked like a shadow of her former self. Her eyes were puffy from crying, and she seemed to have lost weight. She approached me cautiously, as if she were afraid I might explode at any moment. "Hey," she said softly. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. We found a secluded bench and sat down. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was thick with unspoken words. Finally, Laura broke the silence. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I know I messed up and I hurt you in the worst possible way. But I love you and I want to make things right." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Do you even understand what you did?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed our marriage, our future, everything we worked for." Laura nodded, her sobs growing louder. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But please, can we at least try to work things out? I'll do anything." I shook my head. "It's too late for that, Laura. You made your choice when you decided to lie to me, to cheat on me. There's no coming back from that." Her face crumpled, and she reached out to touch my hand. I pulled away, not wanting her to see how much it still hurt. "I found everything," I said, my voice cold. "The photos, the messages, all of it. You and David made a fool out of me, and I can't forgive that." Laura's eyes widened in shock. "You talked to Emily?" I nodded. "Yes, and she deserved to know the truth just as much as I did. We've both been living a lie, and it's time to face the consequences." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I felt a pang of pity for her, but it was quickly overshadowed by my anger and betrayal. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice firm. "I've already started the process. I just wanted to give you the courtesy of knowing face to face." Laura looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Please don't do this," she begged. "I know I messed up, but I can change. I can be better. I stood up, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. It's over, Laura. You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat. Goodbye. I walked away, leaving her sobbing on the bench. As I headed back to my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness, anger, and oddly enough, relief. The chapter with Laura was finally closing, and it was time for me to move on. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and legal meetings. Laura tried to fight the divorce at first, but eventually she gave in. It was a messy, painful process, but I knew it was the right decision. I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies and deceit. I leaned on my friends and family during this time. Mark was a rock, always there with a listening ear and a beer when I needed it. My parents were supportive, though they were heartbroken by the turn of events. It wasn't easy, but I was slowly starting to rebuild my life. Emily and I stayed in touch, offering each other support as we navigated our respective divorces. It was comforting to have someone who truly understood what I was going through. We shared our frustrations, our small victories, and our hopes for the future. One evening, Emily called me, her voice trembling. "I did it," she said. "I served David with the divorce papers." "How did he take it?" I asked, bracing myself for her response. "He was furious, of course," she replied. "But he knew it was coming. I think he's just trying to figure out how to save face now." We talked for a while longer, discussing our plans for the future. Emily mentioned that she was thinking of moving to a new city, starting fresh. I admired her strength and resilience. Despite everything, she was determined to build a new life for herself. As for me, I was taking things one day at a time. I had started seeing a therapist to help me process my emotions and heal from the betrayal. It was a slow, painful journey, but I was beginning to see a glimmer of hope. One night, as I was sitting alone in my now empty house, I reflected on everything that had happened. The pain was still there, but it was starting to dull. I realized that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal and had come out the other side. The divorce was finalized a few months later. Laura and I went our separate ways, and I focused on rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to find happiness again. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends, and even trying my hand at dating. Through it all, I kept in touch with Emily. We became good friends, supporting each other through the ups and downs. There were times when we laughed about our shared experiences, and times when we cried together, mourning the loss of our marriages. In the end, the betrayal had taught me a lot about myself and what I wanted in life. I knew I deserved better, and I was determined to find it. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it head-on, one step at a time. Laura's affair with David had started months before their supposed business trip. It began innocently enough: lunch meetings, coffee breaks, and the occasional late-night work session. But as time went on, their connection deepened, and they started spending more time together outside of work. Laura confided in David about her frustrations with our marriage. She complained about my long hours, my lack of attention, and how she felt neglected. David, ever the smooth talker, offered a sympathetic ear and words of comfort. He made her feel special, appreciated, and desired, things she claimed she hadn't felt in a long time. Their relationship escalated quickly. What started as emotional support soon turned physical. They began sneaking around, meeting up in secret, and spending nights together in hotels. Laura covered her tracks meticulously, creating an elaborate web of lies to keep me in the dark. She would tell me she had late-night meetings or work trips, while in reality, she was with David. She even went as far as to create fake emails and photos to support her stories. It was a level of deception I couldn't fathom, and it made the betrayal cut even deeper. David was no innocent party either. He knew exactly what he was doing and reveled in the thrill of the affair. He encouraged Laura to lie to me, to keep up the charade, and to continue their secret rendezvous. They both got a sick pleasure out of their deceit, believing they could keep it hidden forever. The business trip to Chicago was the culmination of their affair. They had planned it for weeks, meticulously arranging everything to avoid suspicion. Laura created a series of fake emails and itinerary documents, all designed to make the trip look legitimate. She even photoshopped pictures of conference halls and city landmarks to send to me. But their plan started to unravel when I discovered the photo metadata. It was a small mistake, a detail they hadn't considered, but it was enough to expose their lies. When confronted with the evidence, Laura broke down and admitted everything. The facade they had built came crashing down, leaving nothing but shattered trust and broken hearts in its wake. David's wife, Emily, was equally devastated. She had suspected something was off for months, but she never imagined the extent of her husband's betrayal. When I showed her the evidence, she was heartbroken, but also relieved to finally know the truth. Together, we confronted our cheating spouses, demanding answers and seeking closure. Laura and David's affair had far-reaching consequences. It destroyed our marriages, shattered our trust, and left us both reeling from the betrayal. But it also brought us together, forging a bond between Emily and me that helped us navigate the painful aftermath. As Laura moved out and we finalized our divorce, I focused on rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to find happiness again. I threw myself into work, started new hobbies, and leaned on my friends and family for support. Slowly but surely, I began to heal. Emily and I remained close, offering each other support and encouragement. We both knew that moving on wouldn't be easy, but we were determined to make the best of our situations. We shared our hopes and dreams for the future, finding comfort in knowing that we weren't alone. In the end, the affair had taught me valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and the importance of self-worth. I knew I deserved better, and I was determined to find it. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it with newfound strength and determination. The experience had changed me, but it hadn't broken me. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to build a life filled with honesty, love, and respect. And with Emily by my side as a friend and confidant, I knew I could face whatever challenges lay ahead. After Laura moved out, the house felt emptier than ever. It wasn't just her absence that left a void, but the loss of all the dreams and plans we had built together. I had a lot of sleepless nights, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. The silence was deafening. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Laura initially tried to contest it, claiming she deserved more than what we had agreed upon in our prenup. Her lawyer argued that she had given up a lot for our marriage, but my lawyer was firm. We had clear evidence of her infidelity, and the judge took it seriously. Eventually, Laura realized that fighting was futile, and we settled. It was a relief to have that chapter of my life closing, but it also felt like a defeat. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would get divorced. I always believed in till death do us part, but sometimes life throws curveballs that you just can't hit. The hardest part was explaining everything to our families and friends. My parents were supportive, though deeply disappointed. Laura's family was in shock. Her parents couldn't believe their daughter could do something so reckless. Her mother even reached out to me, apologizing for Laura's behavior, but it wasn't her fault. Laura made her own choices. Friends were divided. Some were supportive, while others tried to remain neutral, not wanting to take sides. Mark was my rock through it all, always there with a listening ear and some sage advice. He kept reminding me that I was better off without someone who could betray me so deeply. Emily and I stayed in touch. Our shared experiences created a bond that was hard to explain to others. We met up regularly, offering each other support and a shoulder to cry on. One evening, we sat in a quiet bar, sharing a drink and reflecting on everything that had happened. "Do you think we'll ever really move on from this?" Emily asked, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know," I replied honestly, "but I think we can try. It's all we can do." We raised our glasses in a silent toast to resilience and new beginnings. Months passed, and life slowly started to regain a sense of normalcy. I threw myself into work, took up running to clear my mind, and even started painting again, a hobby I had abandoned years ago. Each day was a step towards healing, even if some days felt like I was just going through the motions. One weekend, I decided to clean out the house, a sort of symbolic cleansing of my past. As I packed up old photos and mementos, I stumbled upon a box of Laura's things she had forgotten. I debated whether to call her or just throw it out, but ultimately I decided to return it. I didn't want any remnants of her lingering in my life. I called her and arranged to drop off the box. When she opened the door, she looked like a ghost of her former self. She thanked me quietly and took the box without looking me in the eye. There was an awkward silence before she finally spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." "I know," I replied. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Laura. Take care." As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't the kind of closure you see in movies. No dramatic reconciliation or tearful goodbyes. It was a quiet acceptance that our paths had diverged, and there was no going back. Emily and I continued to support each other, and our friendship grew stronger. We laughed about our past, shared our hopes for the future, and occasionally vented about the frustrations of dating again. It wasn't easy, but having someone who understood made all the difference. One evening, we decided to go out to a new art exhibit in town. As we walked through the gallery, admiring the paintings, I felt a sense of peace. It was as if I was finally able to see the beauty in life again, despite all the darkness I had been through. Emily and I stood in front of a particularly striking painting, lost in thought. She turned to me and smiled. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "Yeah, we have," I agreed, "and I'm glad we did it together." The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while I felt hopeful. I had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but I had also found strength, resilience, and a true friend in Emily. As we walked out of the gallery, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready to face it head on.